Welcome to today's breakdown. We're going to be exploring a truly profound text today, one that tackles a super relatable, deeply human experience, trying to return from a place of absolute spiritual despair. Whether you're exploring these concepts for the first time or you're coming back to them, this analysis is really all about understanding the mechanics of repentance and divine mercy as they're laid out in our source material. It's a fascinating look at how we heal, so let's just dive right in. I am too sinful to repent. It's a heavy, heavy thought. But it is incredibly common. The source text points out that so many people reach this breaking point where they feel like they've just crossed a line of no return. They look back at their past and think, well, the damage is just too vast now. It's kind of like that financial phrase, too big to fail, but, in reverse. Their spiritual debt feels so unbelievably massive that it could never possibly be forgiven, so they just keep going down the wrong path. So that brings us to part one, the unlikely addressees, a message for those who have crossed the line. We're looking at this absolutely breathtaking passage from the Quran, Surah Az-Zumar, and what makes it so incredibly powerful is who it's actually talking to. It's not addressed to the pious, perfect believers. No, Allah commanded the Prophet to reach out specifically to those who are drowning in guilt, saying, "O my servants who have transgressed against themselves." Think about that. Even in their absolute lowest state, they are still beautifully claimed as my servants. That is the essence of divine mercy right there. Moving on to part two, what is israf? Shifting our perspective on sin. Okay, to really grasp how this mercy works, we have to look at how the text actually defines wrongdoing. It uses this word israf, which literally means exceeding the limits or going beyond the norm. It frames sin not just as breaking some arbitrary harsh rule, but as literal self-harm. Let's put it this way. Imagine you're eating iftar, right? You've had enough, your hunger is completely satisfied, but there's a plate of chicken left on the table. You're completely full, but you eat 6 more pieces and drown them in ketchup just so your cousin doesn't get to eat them. What's going to happen? You're going to get sick. Excess in literally anything, sleep, food, even good things like work, throws you out of balance and it naturally harms you. So here's the crucial takeaway. When you commit israf, you aren't damaging God. You take absolutely nothing away from his kingdom or his power. You are exclusively 100% damaging yourself. This completely flips the narrative of repentance. It goes from dodging a penalty from a strict judge to stopping the self-inflicted damage. The call to repent and stop sinning is really just a compassionate call to stop hurting yourself. Which leads us perfectly into part three, the antidote, divine mercy and sincere repentance. So how exactly do we cure this habit of self-harm? Well, the text provides a dual antidote, rahma, which is an intensely loving divine mercy, and inaba, a sincere spiritual return. The source breaks this recovery down into 3 really distinct steps. Step 1, do not lose hope in his mercy. The text emphasizes that this mercy is absolute. It wipes the slate clean no matter how vast the mistakes were. Step 2, return to your Lord with your heart. And step 3, follow the best, most beautiful aspects of what was revealed. Basically, keep your practice simple and sincere instead of getting completely bogged down in paralyzing technicalities. Let's zoom in on that second step in Abba for a second. It means returning to your Lord entirely and sincerely with your heart. In a practical sense, doing this means you have to shut out the noise. You have to actively turn off the negative voices of people who have already written you off, or those cynics who try to tell you that you're unredeemable. It's an intensely personal, inward pivot right back to the ultimate source of mercy. In real life, this means remembering that spirituality is absolutely not a competitive sport. The text strongly warns against looking at someone else and thinking, wow, they pray so many rakats. They wake up for tahajjud every single night. I'm never going to catch up to that, so why even bother trying? That is a massive, massive trap. Your spiritual return is about you and your Creator alone. You aren't racing the person sitting next to you. You are simply returning to your own true self. Part 4, conversation with regret, the psychological trap of living in the past. Now, if we don't actively seek out that divine mercy, our guilt morphs into this paralyzing trap where we end up living entirely in the past. The text uses a really vivid term for this, hasra. In Arabic, the phrasing in this passage translates literally to, "Oh, my regret." And the source points out how profoundly strange this is. Usually, you address a living, breathing person, right? But here, a person is talking to their regret, as if it's an active, living conversational partner. It's tragic, honestly. People spend decades talking inwardly to their past mistakes, just endlessly rehashing what they did wrong, instead of actually talking to the one who can forgive them. A huge part of that specific regret stems from another concept called takhyirt. So while israf was about doing way too much and going out of bounds, takhyirt is the exact opposite. It's about falling completely short. It's failing to meet even the absolute bare minimum requirements of faith and goodness. The real tragedy of the person experiencing hasra is realizing they didn't even try to hit the baseline, even though that baseline was totally, completely within their reach. To put that into perspective, think about the number 65. In a lot of schools, a 65 is the minimum passing grade. C's get degrees, right? God doesn't demand absolute, flawless perfection from every single person. He doesn't expect 100 on the test every time. He just asks that we do not fall completely below the baseline. He really just wants us to pass. The deepest regret comes from realizing you could have so easily gotten that 65, but you just refused to put in the minimal effort. So that begs the question, why do people fail to even try? Well, this brings us to another major trap, becoming part of the sakhiran. These are the mockers. The source describes those people, teenagers and adults alike, who just roll their eyes, mock religion, and absolutely refuse to take anything seriously. But here's the thing. Often, this isn't because they actually don't care. It's a defense mechanism. They join these cynical groups who make a joke out of literally everything, just to mask their own deep feelings of spiritual inadequacy. The text perfectly contrasts this mocking, rebellious attitude with a heart that has actually been softened, using this beautiful analogy of horses. Think about a wild horse. It's going to kick, rebel, and fight you the second you approach it. But a tamed horse, which represents this concept of tasghir, turns effortlessly with just the absolute gentlest touch of the reins. The entire goal of repentance is to let divine mercy soften your heart so much that it turns easily toward guidance, rather than just constantly kicking back at it. And finally, part 5, time to act now, escaping regret through immediate urgency. So how do we actually avoid this trap of eternal regret? The text injects a massive, undeniable sense of urgency. You have to act now, treating whatever remaining time you have as if it has just begun. The source relates this beautifully to the final days of Ramadan. Even if someone feels like they completely wasted the first 20 days, they shouldn't just throw their hands up and give up. Instead, they should look at the remaining days and apply maximum effort, literally pretending the month just started. And guys, this applies to life as well. No matter how much time you feel you've wasted in excess or falling short, your spiritual journey, your repentance can start fresh right this very second. Based on everything we've unpacked today about infinite mercy, the reality of self-harm, and the dangerous trap of living in the past, I want to leave you with one final, crucial question to think about. Who will you speak with tomorrow? Will you turn your heart and speak to a merciful creator who is actively reaching out to forgive you, or will you spend another day having a conversation with your regret? The choice is entirely yours.
You know, there is this very specific, deeply human feeling that I feel like we rarely talk about out loud.
Oh, definitely. What kind of feeling are you thinking of?
Well, it's that moment when you make a mistake, right? Like maybe it's late at night, you drop a glass in the kitchen, and it just shatters everywhere across the linoleum.
Ugh, the worst. Just glass everywhere.
Right. And instead of going to the closet, getting the broom, and just, sweeping it up, you look at the mess and you feel this overwhelming, crushing wave of defeat.
Like it's just too much effort to even try to fix.
Exactly. And this dark little voice in your head whispers, well, the kitchen is already ruined. Might as well just smash the rest of the plates.
Yeah, it's this absolute surrender to the mess. It's not just a surrender, really. It's like this active, almost perverse decision to accelerate the destruction.
Because the path to fixing it just seems, entirely too exhausting.
Or in your mind, completely impossible, right?
Yeah.
Like you just can't do it.
Right. So have you ever felt like that? I mean, to you, the listener, have you ever felt like you messed up so entirely, whether we're talking about a romantic relationship or a career trajectory or a massive financial blunder, that there was simply no point in trying to fix it?
Like you feel like you were just, too far gone.
Exactly. Too far gone. And today, we are going to explore that exact feeling in this deep dive. We want to understand what it means to feel completely unredeemable.
And we're going to look at how an ancient framework addresses this incredibly modern human tendency to self-sabotage through sheer despair.
Because it really is a fascinating psychological trap, isn't it? The assumption that the personal deficit is just too high, so you might as well keep digging the hole.
It's basically the sunk cost fallacy applied to human morality.
Right. So to really get to the bottom of this, We are looking at a deeply captivating philosophical and theological lecture by speaker Numan Ali Khan. It's titled The Mercy and Forgiveness of Allah, and we are actually working from a translated Russian transcript of this talk today.
Which is such a unique angle to view this through.
It really is. Now, right at the top, I want to state something very clearly to you, our listener. Today's deep dive involves religious and spiritual text. We're specifically talking about the Quran.
Right, and we should be clear about our goals here.
Exactly. Our goal today is absolutely not to endorse, proselytize, or preach the theological viewpoints contained in this source material. We are coming at this completely impartially.
Yeah, we're just analyzing the text.
Yeah.
We aren't taking any sides or pushing a belief system.
We are here to unpack the absolutely fascinating linguistic, psychological, and historical insights presented in this lecture. We want to give you the space to explore these concepts intellectually, regardless of your personal background.
And the intellectual value here really is genuinely immense. I mean, we are essentially looking at an ancient diagnostic manual for dealing with modern mental paralysis.
Diagnostic manual, I like that phrasing.
Yeah, because the text offers a highly sophisticated view of human guilt, and it ruthlessly breaks down the defense mechanisms we build to, avoid dealing with that guilt.
So let's jump right in. If we're going to talk about a cure for this feeling of being too far gone, we have to figure out who the doctor is actually calling into the office.
Right. Who is the target audience for this intervention?
Exactly. And honestly, when I was reading through the notes you pulled from the lecture on this specific passage, it's from a chapter called Surah Az-Zumar, it completely flipped my expectation of how religious texts operate.
I had the exact same reaction. Because when we think of religious texts, or really any kind of institutional manifesto, we assume the primary audience is the in-group.
The pious, the believers, the followers, the people who are already inside the building, sitting quietly in the pews.
Right, the good people. But the lecture highlights that this specific passage is uniquely, explicitly addressed to the absolute worst offenders.
The worst of the worst.
Yeah. It is not talking to everyday people making minor missteps. It is addressed to people who have gone too far, who have crossed the line, and who have made massive, seemingly unforgivable mistakes.
But hold on, why would the text prioritize them? I mean, if I'm running an organization, I'm focusing my communications on my top performers, or at least the people trying their best.
That's standard corporate logic, yeah.
Right. Why center the people who are actively tearing the system down?
Because the text isn't acting as a corporate newsletter, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's acting as a psychological intervention. The passage begins with a very specific command.
That's the command.
The Arabic word is qal, which translates to say. So the ultimate authority here, Allah, doesn't address these rule breakers directly. Instead, there is a command given to the prophet to say it to them.
Wait, I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around that. If this ultimate authority is trying to intervene, why use a middleman?
It seems counterintuitive, right?
Yeah, why not just have a booming voice from the sky? Say, hey, stop doing that.
Yeah.
Doesn't a middleman just dilute the whole message?
Actually, it does the exact opposite. It modulates the message so the recipient can actually hear it without shutting down.
Oh, okay. So it's about how the message is received.
Exactly. Think about the psychology of the intermediary. If an ultimate supreme authority addresses you directly right after you've committed a massive shameful failure, what is your immediate expectation?
A booming voice of condemnation. I mean, I'd assume I was about to be struck by lightning.
Right. You'd brace for impact. You'd throw up every defensive shield you have.
I'd probably just completely tune it out to protect myself.
Yeah, so by saying say, the authority is deliberately placing a human messenger in the gap. It frames the prophet's duty not as a judge delivering an execution sentence from on high, but as a rescuer throwing a lifeline at eye level.
Throwing a lifeline at eye level. Wow. So it completely disarms the expectation of immediate destruction.
It lowers the temperature of the entire interaction.
That makes a lot of sense. But then the actual message that gets delivered through this messenger is what really threw me. Because even though these people have completely gone off the rails, the message starts with, "Oh, my servants."
Yeah, that phrasing is incredible.
That is wild to me. They are still claimed.
They are. My servants or my slaves in this context implies an unbreakable tether.
But usually, you only claim the people who are making you look good. You claim the obedient ones.
True. But here, the tether of belonging is maintained entirely independent of their actions. It bypasses their destructive behavior and speaks directly to their inherent identity.
Okay, let me see if I can translate this to a secular setting to make sure I'm getting the psychological weight of it.
Go for it.
It's like a CEO discovering a faction of employees who have been actively, intentionally destroying the company. I'm talking embezzling funds, smashing the servers, ruining the brand reputation.
Real rogue employee stuff.
Exactly. Now, if I'm the CEO, I am sending security to escort them out of the building. But in this scenario, it's like the CEO orders the head of HR to physically go down to the dark basement where these rogue employees are hiding and specifically address them as my highly valued team.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. It really captures the shock value.
But doesn't that risk a revolt from the, good employees? If I'm an employee who showed up at 8 a.m. every day and followed every single rule, and I see the CEO calling the embezzlers my highly valued team, I'm furious.
Oh, absolutely. You'd feel cheated.
Right. So does the text just ignore the friction of rewarding bad behavior?
Well, that's the crux of it, though. It's not rewarding bad behavior. It is dismantling a hostage situation.
A hostage situation.
Yeah, the people in the basement are holding themselves hostage with their own guilt and their anticipation of punishment.
Oh, I see.
The anticipation of punishment is a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you expect to be fired and prosecuted, you act like someone who has absolutely nothing to lose.
You just keep smashing the servers.
Exactly. By validating their position on the team first, before you even bring up the damage they caused, you disarm their defensive mechanisms. You make it safe for them to drop the weapons they are holding against themselves.
You change the dynamic from adversarial to cooperative?
Precisely. And the historical context provided in the lecture makes this even more profound. This passage was revealed during the Meccan period.
What does that mean, practically speaking?
It means this is early on in the history of the religion, long before many of the strict, detailed rules like what food is halal or haram, or the granular requirements of fasting were even established.
So the rule book was pretty bare at this point.
Exactly. And the primary audience at this time included people committing what is considered the absolute ultimate violation in Islam, which is shirk or polytheism.
So we aren't talking about someone who accidentally ate the wrong thing for lunch.
No, not at all.
We're talking about people violating the absolute core foundational premise of the entire belief system.
Right. It was about establishing core belief, not micromanaging daily behavior. So addressing individuals who are committing the most foundational error possible and still actively calling them my servants is just a statement of radical inclusivity.
It establishes that the door for return is open not just for the slightly flawed, but for the fundamentally lost.
Yes, the fundamentally lost are specifically invited.
So, listener, I want you to sit with that for a second. Think about how often you expect total condemnation when you make a mistake. You brace for impact, right?
You tense up.
Yeah, you expect your partner, your boss, or honestly, your own brutal internal monologue to just rip you apart. Imagine how completely disarming it would be to receive an invitation to connect instead.
It forces you to look at your mistake without the shield of defensiveness.
It removes the external punisher from the equation entirely. You are no longer fighting the boss. You are forced to look at how you are harming yourself.
Exactly. You have to face the mirror.
Which brings up a massive question for me. If we aren't looking at this through the lens of an external punisher, what exactly are we doing when we mess up?
That's the real shift in perspective here.
Right, because the text doesn't just call these people sinners. It doesn't use the standard Arabic words for making a moral mistake or committing a crime. It introduces a specific concept that I think completely redefines how we view our own bad habits.
Yes, the word the lecture focuses heavily on is israf.
Gizras.
Right. The text addresses those who committed israf against themselves. Now, israf doesn't mean sin in the traditional dogmatic sense of breaking a moral law just for the sake of being bad. Linguistically, it translates to excess.
Excess, like having too much of something.
Exactly. It means exceeding the normal functional limits.
The lecture uses this incredibly vivid, kind of funny example to explain this, right?
It does, and it's so relatable. The speaker says, imagine you are having a meal. You eat enough to be completely full. Your hunger is entirely gone. Biologically, you are satisfied.
You're good. You don't need another bite.
Right. But then you see a plate of chicken legs sitting on the table, and you notice your cousin eyeing that exact same plate.
Oh, I know where this is going.
Yep. Just out of pure spite to stop your cousin from getting it, even though you are completely stuffed, you grab 6 more chicken legs, douse them in half a bottle of ketchup, and force them down, along with all the leftover fries.
That sounds miserable.
It is. and that is israf.
I absolutely love that example because it's so grounded. It strips all the mystical, intimidating theology out of the concept of a sin.
It makes it tangible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When I eat those 6 extra chicken legs, I'm not sinning against the chicken. I'm not breaking some ethereal law of the cosmos that makes the universe angry. I'm just breaking my own stomach.
Exactly. You are taking something neutral or even objectively good food, which sustains life, and pushing it past the point where it serves you, straight into the point where it actively harms you.
You are exceeding the operational limits of your own biology.
And this applies to the natural world constantly. Think about water. It is the most essential thing for life. We literally die without it.
But what happens if you have too much water in your lungs? You drown.
Right. Or sugar. Sugar is energy, but too much sugar breaks down your insulin response and destroys your organs.
Or even sleep. Sleep is healing. But if you sleep 16 hours a day, your muscles atrophy and your mind just becomes incredibly lethargic.
This redefines how we interact with the rules. Often, people view religious or ethical rules as arbitrary tests of loyalty. Don't eat this, don't look at that, wear this, don't say that, just to prove you are obedient to me.
Like jumping through hoops just to show you're compliant.
Exactly. But the philosophy of israf suggests a completely different paradigm. The rules are not an arbitrary loyalty test. They are an operational manual for the human machine.
Okay, but let me challenge this a bit. Because it's easy to see how eating 6 extra chicken legs is bad for me. Or drinking too much. Those are really obvious vices. But what about the things we celebrate in modern society? Because the lecture pushes this concept further, saying israf applies to objectively noble pursuits too.
It absolutely does. You can commit excess in things society praises. The speaker gives the example of a person who genuinely loves their job.
Okay.
They are contracted to leave at 3 p.m., but they stay until 7 p.m. every single night because they are so passionate about the business.
That's the modern hustle culture right there.
Right. Or consider a parent who focuses so entirely, so obsessively on caring for their children that nothing else matters. These sound like virtues, don't they?
They sound like the people we give awards to, the Employee of the Month or Mother of the Year. But the text says there's a hidden cost to this kind of dedication.
Yes, because the text introduces the inevitable consequence of israf, which is a concept called tafrit.
Tafrit, what does that mean?
Tafrit means shortcoming or neglect. The core principle here is inescapable. Human capacity is finite. You only have 24 hours in a day. You only have a set amount of emotional bandwidth.
So if you use it all up in one place...
Exactly. If you commit israf excess in one area of your life, by the very laws of physics and time, you must be committing tafrit neglect in another area.
Oh, it's a seesaw. If you think about a playground seesaw, if you push down incredibly hard on one side, even if the weight on that side is something universally praised, like providing for your family financially or building a groundbreaking startup, the other side is violently thrown into the air.
That's a perfect image for it.
You cannot have israf without tafrit. The workaholic who is crushing it at the office is committing tafrit regarding their physical health or their spouse.
Right. They are neglecting the other pillars of their life.
And the hyper-focused parent is committing tafrit regarding their own individual identity or their friendships or their marriage.
The seesaw is the perfect visualization. And returning to the theological aspects of the lecture, this creates a profound shift in perspective regarding our relationship with the divine.
How so?
When you rebel against these natural limits, when you unbalance the seesaw and commit israf, you aren't actually hurting Allah. As the speaker bluntly puts it, you cannot take anything from his kingdom.
So you aren't damaging the divine infrastructure?
No. The rule book isn't there to protect God from your bad behavior. It's there to protect you from yourself.
Wait, let's pause on that because that is a massive philosophical shift. Are you saying that in this framework, a sin isn't an offense that angers a deity?
The lecture frames it as a disruption of your own equilibrium. The divine is infinite. If you act terribly, you don't diminish the infinite, you only diminish yourself.
So it goes from being a moral crime that angers a celestial judge to a mechanical issue that damages the machine.
Exactly.
It's like putting diesel fuel in a standard unleaded gasoline engine. The manufacturer at the Toyota plant isn't sitting in an office somewhere feeling morally outraged or personally betrayed by you, right? The manufacturer is just trying to warn you that your engine is going to explode if you keep doing that.
And think about how crucial that reframing is for the person we talked about at the beginning. The person sitting on the kitchen floor who feels too far gone.
The person with the broken glass.
Right. If you view your past mistakes as a series of unforgivable moral crimes, against an infinite pure being. The guilt is paralyzing. You can't even look up.
It's too heavy.
But if you view them as israf, as you simply pushing the levers of your own life way too far in the wrong direction for too long, it becomes a mechanical problem. And mechanical problems, no matter how severe, can be diagnosed. They can be fixed by adjusting the balance.
So I want to ask you, the listener, right now, where is the israf in your life? And I'm not just talking about your bad habits. Are you over-indexing on a supposedly good thing at the catastrophic expense of everything else?
It's a tough question to ask yourself.
It is. Are you telling yourself you're just being dedicated or driven when really you're pinning the seesaw to the ground and letting the other side completely break apart?
It requires a brutal level of honesty to look at the areas of your life where you are supposedly succeeding and ask yourself what is secretly paying the price for that success.
But let's follow the timeline of this. What happens when that israf goes on for too long? What happens when you've been putting diesel in the unleaded engine for 10 years?
Well, we cross a red line.
Right. And the lecture points out that once that red line is far behind us in the rearview mirror, a very specific, incredibly dangerous psychology takes over.
To explain the psychological state, the lecture makes a brilliant comparison to the 2008 American economic mortgage crisis. It maps macroeconomic disaster onto individual human behavior.
Okay, I love this analogy. During the 2008 crash, the defining phrase of the era was too big to fail. You had these massive financial institutions that had accrued so much toxic debt, their failure was so catastrophic and widespread that society just threw its hands up. The logic of the bailouts was essentially, the hole is too deep, the math is broken, we can't possibly unwind this legitimately, so we might as well just print more money and keep the broken system limping along.
And the speaker argues that an individual goes through that exact same realization.
Wow.
When a person realizes they have been living in a state of israf for years. Maybe they've destroyed a decade of a marriage or compromised their ethics for years to get ahead. They look at their spiritual or personal deficit and think, my debt is too big to fail.
They think, I am too far gone, I can't pay this back, I can't apologize enough to fix the marriage, I can't undo the lies, so I might as well just keep doing what I'm doing. It's the sunk cost fallacy applied directly to human morality.
Exactly. The sunk cost fallacy dictates that you continue a destructive behavior simply because you've already invested so much time or energy into it. You think, I've already ruined my health for the last 15 years by smoking. Trying to jog today is a pathetic joke.
It feels pointless.
People assume they have accrued too much negative equity to ever break even, so they declare moral bankruptcy. They accept the identity of the failure. They become the mess on the kitchen floor.
But the text identifies this specific thought process as a massive, lethal trap. In fact, it frames this attitude of, I'm too far gone, as a form of despairing in the mercy of Allah. It says that believing your mess is too big to be cleaned up is actually an insult to the cleaning crew.
Because it operates on the arrogant assumption that your human capacity to destroy things is somehow greater than the divine capacity to restore them.
Oh, that's powerful. Your destruction isn't bigger than their restoration.
Exactly. So to counter this toxic fallacy, the text offers the first real remedy of our journey, which is understanding a concept called Rahmah.
Now, Rahmah is usually translated in English as mercy, but the speaker in the lecture insists on a different, much warmer translation, right?
Yes, he translates it as loving care.
Loving care. And the promise presented in the text is that this Rahmah will cover and forgive all sins, no matter the volume, all of them. It is an absolute, unconditional, 100% debt forgiveness program.
It wipes the slate completely clean.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here again because my modern, cynical brain is flashing warning signs.
Okay, what's the warning sign?
Let's look at this from a strictly human perspective. If I have a friend or a family member who repeatedly lies to me, steals money from my wallet, and breaks my trust over and over for years, loving care is the absolute last thing I want to offer them.
Naturally, you'd want to cut them off.
Right. Unconditional debt forgiveness feels like I'm being a sucker. It feels like I'm enabling their toxic behavior. Does the text address this? How does it differentiate this divine Rahmah from just being a doormat and enabling someone to keep being terrible?
That is a critical friction point, and it's essential to understand the difference. If we go back to our previous realization that israf, or excess, only harms the individual, not the divine Roy, it changes the dynamics of forgiveness entirely.
Okay, walk me through that.
If your human friend steals from you, you are materially diminished. You've lost $100. You have lost peace of mind. Therefore, your forgiveness requires a sacrifice of your own limited resources.
Right. They're taking my resources. I have a finite amount of money and patience.
But the divine, by definition, is infinite and cannot be depleted. You cannot steal from the infinite.
Oh, wow.
Therefore, divine Rama isn't like a human victim pardoning an abuser who was actively hurting them. It is much more like an oncologist treating a stubbornly ill patient.
A doctor, not a victim.
Exactly. A doctor doesn't look at a patient and say, you smoked for 20 years despite my warning, so I'm personally offended, I feel used, and I refuse to treat your lungs. You're enabling yourself.
The doctor doesn't feel stolen from.
No. The doctor says, your behavior is destroying your own body. The damage is severe. But let's start the treatment today. The doctor's care isn't enabling the disease. It is the necessary mechanism for curing it.
Wow. Okay, that distinction is incredibly powerful. A judge pardons a criminal who offended the state, but a doctor treats a patient who harmed themselves.
Exactly.
If the rules of the universe are just health metrics, then Rama is just infinite, unconditional medical care. It's the hospital saying, I don't care how many times you avoided the clinic or how much junk food you ate. The door is open, the bed is ready, and the medicine is entirely free.
And accepting that realization is the mandatory first step. You absolutely cannot begin to change your behavior if you believe the damage is permanent and your debt is unpayable.
The sunk cost fallacy has to be dismantled.
The absolute ironclad guarantee of Rama removes the excuse of the sunk cost fallacy. It says, your debt is wiped out today. You are starting at zero, not negative 1 million.
Okay, so let's say we accept that. We conquer our internal despair, we realize our bankruptcy has been forgiven, and we are ready to step out the front door and start over.
A fresh start.
But the moment we step outside with this new, clean slate, we immediately slam into a brand new, entirely external obstacle, which is looking at everybody else.
Ah, yes, the trap of comparison.
Yes, because if we accept the clean slate, the second step outlined in the text is something called inaba,
which the speaker translates as returning to your Lord with your heart.
But what fascinated me is the prerequisite for inaba. To return with your heart, you have to aggressively, almost violently shut out external voices.
And the lecture identifies two distinct, equally dangerous groups of voices that threaten this return.
The first group is exactly what you'd expect, right?
Right, the haters, the cynics, the people in your life who look at your past and say, you will never be a good person. We remember what you did in 2018. We know your track record. You were permanently written off.
Which is really just society externalizing the exact same despair we just talked about conquering internally. If you refuse to tell yourself you're too far gone, society will gladly volunteer to say it for you.
Exactly. They enforce the old narrative. But the second group the text warns against is actually much more insidious, primarily because they aren't trying to hurt you at all.
They don't have bad intentions.
No, it's the intimidation of the hyper-pious, the overachievers, the people who are seemingly perfect.
The lecture gives this painfully relatable example. Imagine you're finally feeling good, you've accepted Rama, you're trying to get back on a spiritual or moral track, and a brother comes up to you with a big smile and says, Mashallah, I just finished reading the entire Quran twice this month.
And he's just sharing his joy, right? He's not trying to flex.
But you're sitting there, and you haven't even managed to focus enough to read the opening chapter, and internally, the trap snaps shut. You conclude, these people are on a bullet train to heaven, and I'm riding a tricycle in the opposite direction. Why am I even trying?
It destroys your momentum before your foot even hits the pedal.
It really does.
The core message of Inaba is an absolute mandate to stop looking sideways. The speaker emphasizes over and over, it is not a competition. It fundamentally doesn't matter who prayed 8 units or 20 units, or who practically lives at the mosque, or who volunteers the most hours.
This sounds exactly like gym intimidation. It's the purely secular equivalent. Let's say you spend years eating those chicken legs we talked about earlier. You are entirely out of shape. You finally muster the courage to change your life.
You take that first step.
You buy the running sneakers, you walk into the gym for the very first time feeling incredibly vulnerable, and the first thing you see is a guy deadlifting 400 pounds while balancing a protein shake on his head, and he doesn't even have a drop of sweat on him.
It's terrifying.
And what do? You turn right around, walk out the glass doors, and go home to sit on the couch.
Because you measured your starting line against their finish line. And what we have to synthesize here is why comparison is the literal enemy of Inaba.
Why is it the enemy?
Because true spiritual or even personal return is an individual tether. It is a straight, single line drawn between you and the goal, or in this context, between the person and the divine.
Just a two-way street.
Exactly. The moment you look sideways to see what the 400-pound deadlifter is doing, you introduce a third point.
Yeah.
You turn a straight line into a triangle. You add the judgment of others into the equation, and that immediately severs the direct tether.
You lose the signal entirely. But here's my question for you. How do we actually do this?
That's the challenge.
Because saying, stop comparing yourself is great advice, but it's like telling someone, don't think of a pink elephant. It's human nature to look around. If I'm physically in the gym next to the guy deadlifting 400 pounds, my brain is hardwired by evolution to compare my social standing and physical prowess to his.
It's a biological instinct, yeah.
Does the text offer a mechanism for actually silencing that instinct and putting the blinders on?
The mechanism is actually found in the definition of inaba itself, returning with the heart.
Okay, explain that.
Actions, by their nature, can be compared. I can empirically see you lifting heavier weights than me. I can time you praying longer than me. I can count how many times you read the book.
Right, they are measurable metrics.
But the heart's return is a purely internal metric. It is entirely invisible to everyone, except the individual and the divine. When you shift your focus away from the outward performance, which is measurable, finite, and comparable, and lock it onto the inward sincerity, which is entirely subjective to your own personal starting point, the comparison naturally dissolves.
Because you aren't measuring the same thing anymore.
Exactly. You realize the guy deadlifting 400 pounds is operating on a completely different metric that has zero bearing on your internal alignment.
So it's about shifting your entire dashboard from external KPIs, key performance indicators, to internal alignment.
Yes, recalibrating the dashboard.
Okay, let's follow the psychological journey further. You block out the haters, you ignore the gym bros of spirituality, you successfully put the blinders on, you are finally left alone with yourself, no distractions. But that is when you confront what is arguably the most terrifying reality of all, which is the relentless passage of time and the ghosts of your own past.
Oh, when the external noise finally stops, the internal monologue gets very, very loud.
The context of this lecture really anchors this feeling of running out of time. The speaker notes he was delivering this talk during the last third of Ramadan.
Which is a very specific, high-pressure time.
Right. For those who might not know, Ramadan is a 30-day period of fasting, intense spiritual focus, and discipline. And the speaker points out that by day 20, a huge portion of people feel like they've completely wasted the month.
They look back and just see failure.
They haven't built the new habits, they haven't done the extra reading, maybe they slipped up on their fasting. And so because the month is 66% over, they just want to give up on the last 10 days. They feel like the clock has run out.
It's the classic, I've already ruined my diet by having a donut at breakfast, so I'll just eat an entire pizza for dinner mindset, but applied to the calendar.
Exactly. And the speaker gives this incredibly practical psychological life hack. He says, stop thinking of it as the end of a 30-day month. Wake up on day 21 and treat the last 10 days as a brand new, isolated 9-day month.
Reset the clock entirely.
Zero out the ledger. Because the warning here is stark. You have to act now, before the consequence comes suddenly.
And to emphasize that urgency, the lecture introduces a specific Arabic term here, which is nusra.
Nusra?
Yes. The speaker makes a point to distinguish nusra from regular, everyday words for help or assistance. Nusra is heavy, military-level assistance.
Not just a helping hand.
No, it's the cavalry coming over the hill when your unit is completely surrounded. It's a massive airdrop of supplies when your city is starving.
Yeah.
And the text emphasizes that this nusra is available now, in the present moment, but it won't be available forever. The window for the airdrop will eventually close.
The urgency is palpable. But what happens if you ignore that urgency? What happens if you let the clock run out because you're too busy feeling sorry for yourself?
That's the dark reality.
The text paints a picture of the day of judgment, and it highlights a very specific, chilling phrase that those who wasted their time will say. They will say, oh, my regret. In Arabic, it is ya hasrata.
And this is where the linguistic analysis in the lecture reaches a profound, almost literary depth. The speaker identifies this phrase, oh, my regret, as istiara makniya.
What does that mean?
It's a complex rhetorical device where an inanimate concept or abstract emotion is addressed as if it were a living, breathing being.
Wait, so they aren't just feeling the emotion of regret, they're literally talking to it.
Precisely. They are conversing with regret as if it is an entity living inside them, a permanent roommate in their mind.
That is haunting, and it is so incredibly accurate to how clinical depression and rumination actually work.
It really is. The psychology of personifying regret is devastating. When you dwell deeply on the past, You aren't just passively recalling memories like watching a movie. You are actively engaging in an ongoing daily dialogue with your own failures.
Why did I do this? If only I'd done that.
Why didn't I invest in that? Why did I say that to her? The tragedy, as the speaker points out, is ultimately a matter of bandwidth.
Bandwidth, like mental capacity.
Yes, your brain only has so much communicative energy. If you spend 10, 20, or 30 years locked in an intense, obsessive conversation with your regret, you have absolutely zero bandwidth left to talk to Allah. You missed the chance to communicate with the one source that can actually offer you the nusra, the heavy military assistance, because your phone line is tied up talking to a ghost.
Oh man, it's like having two cell phones sitting on your desk.
Right.
One phone line connects directly to emergency services. It connects to Nusra, to a fleet of rescue helicopters with their rotors spinning, ready to deploy the second you ask for extraction.
They are literally waiting for the call.
And the other phone connects to an automated recording of your worst failures, just looping endlessly. And human beings, in our perverse, self-destructive nature, will pick up the phone with the recording and sit on the line for decades, listening to the loop, while the rescue phone just gathers dust.
You have to choose who you are talking to. The divine who offers a clean slate, or the regret that offers nothing but paralysis. And the source adds another layer of tragedy to this realization.
What's...
These individuals who spent their lives talking to regret will eventually admit to Tafrit.
We talked about Tafrit earlier, the counterpart to israf, the excess. Tafrit means falling short, or neglect.
Yes, but the speaker frames it in a very specific, agonizing way here. It's not just that they failed utterly, it's that they failed to meet the bare minimum. He uses the analogy of a school test where a 65 is passing. Tafrit is getting a 64.
The agony of the near miss. It wasn't that they needed to be perfect, 100% students. They just needed the minimum passing grade.
And they failed to get that 64, despite a crucial, heartbreaking fact. The text says Allah was fi janbillah. This translates to right by their side, like a neighbor.
A neighbor. That implies such proximity. It's not an institutional relationship. It's right over the fence.
Exactly. The divine wasn't some distant entity sitting on a cloud, requiring an arduous, 1,000-mile pilgrimage to reach. The heavy assistance was right next door, ready to help push them over that 65 passing grade. But they were so busy talking to regret, looking backward, they completely ignored the neighbor standing right next to them until the clock ran out.
So I have to ask you, the listener, right now, pause whatever you were doing and think about this. What past failure are you currently having a daily conversation with? Who is the roommate living in your head rent-free?
It's a profound reflection.
Is it a failed business, a broken relationship, a period of addiction? And is that obsessive conversation preventing you from picking up the other phone?
It is a sobering question. Because if a person refuses to face this reality, if they don't want to do the hard, uncomfortable work of hanging up on regret and asking for help, there is only one other place for the human mind to go.
Where do they go?
If they avoid the paralyzing depression of regret, they will inevitably adopt the exact opposite defense mechanism.
Which brings us to our final section. If we won't fix the problem and we won't cry about the problem, we use the ultimate shield against vulnerability, which is we turn it all into a joke.
The defense mechanism of mockery.
The text describes these individuals who fall short, who miss the 65 passing grade, as eventually admitting that they were among the sakrin, the mockers, those who joke. And the linguistic deep dive the lecture does on this word is absolutely my favorite part of this entire deep dive.
The root of sakhan comes from the Arabic word taskir.
And taskir doesn't initially mean comedy or jokes at all, right?
No, not at all. It means to tame or to subdue.
The lecture uses the analogy of a wild kicking horse. If you walk up behind a wild, unbroken horse, it will kick your teeth in. It is incredibly dangerous. It is a massive threat to your physical safety.
It's raw, untamed power.
Right. But once that horse undergoes taskir, once it is tamed, broken, and subdued, you can sit on its back and it will respond to the slightest pull of the reins. It no longer poses a threat. The text also notes this word is used to describe how Allah subdues the massive, terrifying forces of nature, like taming the dark clouds and the hurricane winds, making them gentle and useful.
This linguistic connection is an absolute masterclass in human psychology. Why do we mock things? Why do we use irony? Because irony and mockery are shields.
Shields against what?
When you are faced with a set of rules or a profound existential truth or a consequence that makes you feel deeply guilty, that truth is like the wild horse. It is a threat to your ego. It makes you feel small and uncomfortable and exposed.
So how do you handle a psychological threat you can't defeat? You tame it.
Yes, you use mockery to subdue the seriousness of the threat.
If I laugh at the rules, if I turn the concept of moral accountability into a punchline, I am actively stripping it of its power over me. I am taming the guilt I feel for breaking those rules.
It is a brilliant yet inherently cowardly survival tactic.
Yeah.
By making it a joke, you decree that you don't have to take it seriously. And if you don't take it seriously, you are absolved from the hard work of having to actually change your behavior.
The lecture shares an anecdote that illustrates this perfectly. The speaker says a man came up to him after a talk and asked, "How do I make teenagers love Islam in 30 seconds?"
Which is an impossible question.
And the speaker is baffled, like, 30 seconds? What are you talking about? It's a lifelong spiritual journey. And the man explains his frustration. He says every time he tries to talk to these teens earnestly about faith or life choices or consequences, they just roll their eyes. They say, yeah, whatever, we're all going to hell anyway. Can I get my gaming console back now?
That teenage apathy is the absolute embodiment of Taskir. Yeah, we're going to hell, past the controller. They've taken the ultimate existential threat, the wild horse, and shrunk it down into a sarcastic, dismissive shrug.
But the speaker warns about the extreme long-term danger of this. It doesn't magically stop when you grow out of being a teenager. This apathy calcifies. It hardens. It becomes a lifelong group identity.
Because it's a social currency, too.
Right. People join the mockers because, let's face it, it looks cool to not care. The guy who cares earnestly, the guy trying really hard at the gym or at his spiritual life, looks uncool. He's sweating, he's vulnerable. The guy in the back of the room who laughs at everything looks untouchable. So you join the Sakurin, and over time, you absorb the traits of this cynical group until it becomes your permanent personality.
The insidious nature of this joining the group is that it alienates you from your own sincerity. If you spend your life performing apathy for the benefit of other cynics, you eventually lose the capacity to feel deeply about your own existence.
You laugh your way into spiritual and emotional numbness.
Exactly. And when the time comes when you actually need to be serious, when the reality of your choices catches up with you, or tragedy strikes, or the clock runs out, you literally won't know how to process it. You will only know how to deflect.
This is so intensely relevant right now. Think about modern internet culture. It is essentially built on a foundation of Taskir. We live in an era where caring earnestly about almost anything is labeled as cringe.
Oh, absolutely. Caring is cringe.
If you try too hard, you're cringe. If you believe in something sincerely, you're cringe. So what do? We meme everything to death. We meme our economic anxieties. We meme global conflicts. We meme our own crippling mental health crises. Haha, look at my trauma. We use irony to tame our collective panic because looking at the wild horse directly is just too terrifying.
And while that irony might provide temporary, fleeting relief, the source text acts as a stark, unyielding warning. The underlying reality hasn't changed just because you laughed at it.
The horse is still wild.
The horse is still wild? You've just convinced yourself it's a pony. The tragedy of the Sakharin is that they arrive at the end of their time, the clock runs out, and they realize that their entire defense mechanism was a delusion. They joked their way right out of the passing grade.
Wow. Okay, let's take a deep breath and synthesize the incredible arc we've been on in this deep dive.
It's been a journey.
We started by looking at a text that subverts all of our expectations about authority and punishment. We saw an invitation not to the perfect, unbroken people, but to the worst offenders, calling them my servants, and offering a tether of connection that bypasses their worst mistakes.
From there, we redefined the concept of sin itself. We moved away from the idea of an arbitrary moral failing that angers a distant deity and understood it mechanically as israf, an excess that breaks our own operational limits.
Yeah.
And we saw how that excess inevitably leads to tafrit, the neglect of the things that actually matter.
Then we confronted the illusion of the too-big-to-fail trap, the sunk cost fallacy that tells us our debt is too high to ever pay back. But we learned that the concept of Rama unconditional loving care wipes that debt clean, acting as a doctor curing a stubbornly sick patient rather than a judge punishing a criminal.
With that clean slate, we explored the necessity of inaba, returning with the heart. This requires us to put on the blinders and stop comparing our messy beginnings to someone else's highlight reel, recognizing that comparison completely severs our direct tether to growth.
And finally, we faced the two ultimate enemies of change. First, the paralyzing internal dialogue with regret. Treating our past mistakes as a roommate we conversed with for decades, completely ignoring the massive nusra, the heavy military assistance waiting on the other line. And second, the external defense mechanism of mockery. Tusker. The cynical, cowardly attempt to tame realities we are too afraid to face earnestly, warning against the danger of letting irony calcify into our permanent identity.
It truly is a masterclass in human psychology, brilliantly wrapped in ancient theology.
It really is. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over, something to explore on your own today. The text says that heavy military-level aid, Nusra, is available right now. The helicopters are fueled, the supplies are loaded, and the neighbor is waiting right by your side. But this aid won't be available forever. The window will close.
The clock is ticking.
So imagine for a second that you drop that glass in the kitchen tonight. But this time, instead of smashing the rest of the plates in despair, instead of laughing it off sarcastically and tweeting a meme about how broken you are, instead of spending the next 10 years talking to regret about how clumsy you've always been, you just pick up the other phone. If you were to drop your shield irony today and permanently hang up the phone on regret, what is the very first thing you would ask for help with? Think about it. Have a great day, everyone.